Welcome to Chapter 1, Unit Introduction of the Subaru lineartronic CVT Generation 1. In this chapter, I'll talk about the basic transmission operation, vehicle application, tag information, transmission main components, gear ratios, speed sensors, pressure taps, and shifter positions. My name is Jared Warren, and I will be your host for this course. It's a great day to fix transmission, so let's get started. The lineartronic CVT is an automatic continuous variable all-wheel drive longitude transaxle. It provides an indefinite stepless change in ratio. The Subaru lineartronic is found behind the 2.0 and the 2.5, starting in 2009. The transmission consists of an input clutch, a forward clutch, reverse clutch, and a transfer clutch. The pulley system has a chain unlike a belt in some of the other transmissions. In 2009 and 2010, the lineartronic was found in the Impreza, Legacy, Outback, and the US models. The tag can be found on top of the transmission and is above the starter. You're able to see the tag from under the hood. The Generation 1 transmission tag will start with the TR690. Generation 2, by the way, is TR580. We're going to be talking about just the Generation 1 today. Here's a component apply chart. The input clutch is applied as soon as the engine RPMs are around 400 RPMs. To get reverse, it applies the reverse clutch. To get forward, it applies the forward clutch. The transfer clutch is applied under heavy engine loads or when the system sees the front wheels are slipping. It basically makes it an all-wheel drive. Solenoid control is a little different on this unit. There are no shift solenoids for the different gear changes. It uses the primary up and the primary down solenoid to control the ratio. The primary up solenoid adds oil pressure to the primary pulley. The primary down solenoid drains pressure from the primary pulley, which controls the ratios. The secondary linear control solenoid is the main solenoid that controls line pressure. For lockup, you have two different solenoids. You have the lockup on-off, which controls the direction of fluid flow in the converter itself. And the duty cycle solenoid controls the slip. We can see lockup, full lockup by as early as 8 miles per hour. The transfer case clutch solenoid, when the computer commands that clutch on, it basically turns into an all-wheel drive. So the duty cycle solenoid is for the transfer case clutch. The reverse ratio is 2.358 to 1, and the forward ratio is 3.525 to 0.558 to 1. That's a pretty good ratio change from low position to overdrive. The tap shift function allows you to shift the transmission. It'll allow it to feel like a 6-speed automatic, where you actually feel a shift. When you use the tap shift function, basically the transmission jumps to the next preset ratio. So like in the chart here, manual first gear is 2.18 to 1. You tap it up to second gear, the ratio changes to 1.45 to 1. Tap it to third, 1.03 to 1. Fourth, fifth, and sixth are all overdriven. The main harness connectors are on top of this transmission. You have the T3 black connector, and the T4 is the gray connector. Under those, you have the primary speed sensor and the secondary pressure sensor. Additionally, on the passenger side, you have a range switch, or some call it inhibitor switch, which is on the main case right above the pan rail. On the driver's side, you have the secondary speed sensor, basically in the middle of the transmission case, reading the secondary pulley speed. Front wheel speed sensor reading off the pinion tooth of the transfer gear in the mid-extension housing. The cooler return is the bottom line, and The transfer case clutch pressure port is in mid case on the driver's side. To check the transfer case clutch pressure, hook to that tap, start the vehicle, and you should have around 0 psi in park and reverse. Put the shifter in the manual second position, or manual 2, second gear. Increase throttle to about 60%, and you should have 58 to 102. At wide open throttle, you should have about 145 to 174 psi. To check secondary pressure, or some call mainline pressure, you definitely want to have a gauge and hose that is rated over 1,000 psi. I prefer the transducer; it'd be a lot safer and more accurate. So I like to use the transducers when checking high pressure like this. Drive pressure will be, install pressures will be 652 to 870 psi. Idle pressure is sitting there with no load, 72 to 218 psi. Shifter positions, park, reverse, neutral, and drive, and the manual mode. So of course, park park, reverse, and neutral is normal, just like any other transmission. The drive position, you're not going to feel any ratio change or any shift changes, but you should feel a smooth increase in speed. Engine RPMs are kind of high; it almost feels like a slipping transmission. And manual mode, you can shift up and down with using the tap up and tap down paddles that are on the steering wheel. If the engine speed's too high or too low, and you hit like the shift up and the engine RPMs aren't high enough, it's not going to allow you to upshift. There are 6 gears available in the manual shift mode. So if you look on the picture to the left, you'll see the picture of shifter. For manual mode, you just move the whole shifter over to the left, and then you use the buttons on the steering wheel, tap up and tap down for your upshifts. A little bit about it, power flow and identifying some of the components. Up front, you have the torque converters like basically any other transmission. It has a lockup clutch in there. That's driving your pump. It actually has a pump drive chain. Pump drive chain turns the off-axis pump, which basically means the pump is out off to the side and it's chain driven. The input shaft it has a gear on it and is powering the primary reduction gear, which is connected to your input clutch. Your input clutch applied in every gear as soon as the engine RPMs are above 400 RPMs. That clutch automatically applies. That clutch is then connected to your primary pulley. The primary pulley and your secondary pulley are connected with the chain. The power coming out of the secondary pulley goes over to another gear and actually is off to another gear, another set of transfer gears there, which is going into the forward and reverse mechanism, which is basically your forward clutch and your reverse clutch. And there's one planetary in there for your reverse. Power coming out of the forward reverse mechanism is another set of transfer gears and your transfer case clutch. Transfer case clutch basically makes it an all-wheel drive system. Generally, this is a front-wheel drive vehicle powered through the front differential. This will conclude our Chapter 1 for Unit Introduction on the Subaru Lineartronic Generation 1 transmission. We want to thank you for participating in our virtual training solutions powered by ATRA. Till next time, let's keep fixing transmissions together.